issue. Now, coming up next, how much are you really getting done by multitasking? We'll talk about that with Dr. Greg Ketchum on today's Ask the Expert. Multitasking, what is it and why is it important? The ability to multitask is highly prized these days, but how much are we really accomplishing when we try to do too much at once? Here to talk about this phenomenon, Dr. Greg Ketchum, workplace and career expert with TalentPlanet.com. Dr. Greg, thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Rob.
Now, you know, with the NCAAs, I got all upset and in a huff because loss of productivity. You'd think that people aren't getting stuff done if you listen to me. What's the reality out there?
Well, you know, the availability of technology these days means that just about anybody can multitask all the time. In fact, it's sort of addictive, Rob. I mean, I find myself sometimes at night watching TV and web surfing at the same time, and I'm looking at news sites that I've maybe looked at 2 or 3 times before already. So it can be addictive, and it can actually get in the way of developing some other skills.
So isn't that just people kind of like getting sidetracked? And again, like I saw the Yankees score a couple times today. I watched the Boston game a couple times today when I should have been working.
Well, there's some interesting research that's out now, Rob, that deals with this topic. One is a study at Microsoft found that workers took an average of 15 minutes to get back to critical thinking skills like writing a report or writing code. Took 15 minutes on average to get back to that when they responded to an email or an instant message. They tended to then look, do a little surfing on the web, respond to other emails. So if you look at that across the nation, 50 minutes to get back to your productivity, that's a pretty high cost. Another study at UCLA looked at a group of 20-somethings and looked at brain activity when they were focusing on one thing at a time versus multitasking. And the researchers found that initially there was no difference in recall and what the subjects learned. However, when they interviewed them later, they found that those people who were only focusing on one task at a time had a higher level of recall of the task that they were doing, that whatever the mental activity was. Now, the really interesting thing, Rob, is that they looked at the brain activity when people were doing these tasks, and when people were focusing only on one thing, the area of the brain that was most active is called the hippocampus, and that's an area of the brain that's responsible for retaining and recalling information or putting down memory tracks. On the other hand, when people were multitasking, that part of the brain was quiet, and the part of the brain that is responsible for learning repetitive tasks, called the striatum, was active. So, Rob, what does that tell you about multitasking?
I don't know. So what's the difference between skipping out and watching a little porn and skipping out and watching a little baseball, or just refreshing my mind? I don't know. So what are some tasks or what are some steps that we could take to make sure that our multitasking is proper?
Well, you know, multitasking has its place. So you want to use it as a tool, not as a default option. You may get more things done, but you're going to retain fewer things. For example, I was a little bit late today, so I was driving over here. I was putting on my TV makeup in the mirror at the same time. That was a multitasking thing. I probably shouldn't have done it, but it worked in that situation. Another thing is that if you're multitasking all the time, you may end up making yourself less intelligent or more stupid. Now, that's a kind of a provocative thing to say, but what I mean is research shows that when you use your brain to do heavy lifting, to be thinking deeply about something, critical thinking, analyzing a problem, it does get that area of the brain called the hippocampus going, and when you use it, it creates new neural connections. So in effect, you become smarter. The more you use your brain in a creative, heavy lifting way, the smarter you become. On the other hand, if you're just interested in doing a job that requires repetitive action, then multitask all the time. A third factor here is you want to be careful that multitasking can interfere with your relationships, both personal and professional. I don't know how many times I've been in a meeting where somebody is text messaging or even talking on their cell phone. I know when my wife picks up her BlackBerry and we're having a conversation, I do find it distracting. So you want to make sure that you don't do that because it can interfere with relationships. And finally, if you multitask all the time, you don't really learn how to think critically about things, to think deeply or concentrate or focus. Those can get interrupted with. If you think about it, you know, what would the world be like if Einstein had been an addictive I-emmer? Or what would the Sistine Chapel look like if Michelangelo had been hooked on text messaging with his friends?
That's going to be my excuse. I'm Einstein in disguise. I'm hooked on an instant messaging. Let's pull up his contact information. Always a brilliant guest. This man deserves his own show. Let's see if we got it here. Dr. Greg Ketchum. He is a doctor, workplace and career expert. Again, talking multitasking. That was much more fascinating than I would have thought it was. But then again, I was distracted. I was doing some instant messaging. Talentplanet.com. It's talentplanet.com. Dr. Greg at talentplanet.com. How you can contact him. You need to get brushed up on skill sets so you stay in the workplace a long time.